Hello and welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast. This is episode 266, Intimacy Beyond the Physical.
Yes, welcome to the Hole in My Heart podcast, where we talk about how the gospel is good news for everyone every day. I'm your host, Lori Krieg, and next to me is my husband and favorite licensed therapist, Matt Krieg. Hey, Matt.
Hi.
And we're coming at you from the lovely WCSG radio studio in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And this episode and this whole season is brought to you by O'Neill Asset Management. O'Neill, that's your friend Andrew, isn't it, Matt?
Mm-hmm.
He's my friend too, and he has helped us when he looked at our financial situation, and he's helped us know, I don't know how to invest. I don't even know how to keep a budget, barely. Just ask the guy next to me. So I'm super thankful for people who God has gifted in the financial arena. If you guys are like, hey, I would love someone to help us look at our 401k, to help us know how do we even do any of that, just go to o'neillassetmanagement.com. Thank you to the team there. This new season, we are focusing on community. Which when I even say community, I feel like my brain half falls asleep because it's like community. Okay, are you going to make me start a small group? Are you going to make me have to invite people into my life? I'm not going to make you do anything. But I do think that we have increasingly made our worlds very, very, very on the internet and very, very, very social media. And I want us to just begin. And I'm looking in the mirror at myself first to just think about how can we invite real life human people into the grit of our world. And so today we are inviting a couple of, one new friend and one friend I've known for a long time, Greg Coles and Julia Hedjuk. And they are going to talk to us about intimacy beyond the physical, or their new book, Sexuality Beyond Sex. And how does community play a role there? Oh my goodness, this sounds like community. We're talking about sexuality. Is that inappropriate? No, it's not. It's going to get really helpful. Matt, who are these two people that we're talking to, though?
Greg Coles has a PhD from Penn State and is a writer, speaker, and language scholar. He is the author of several books, including Single Gay Christian, No Longer Strangers, and The Limits of My World. Greg lives in Boise, Idaho, where he serves as a senior research fellow at the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender. Julia Hedjuk has a PhD from Harvard and is the Reverend Jacob Beverly Steitler Professor of Classics at Baylor University. She has written several books on Latin poetry, most recently The God of Rome, Jupiter, and Augustan poetry. She and her husband live in Waco, Texas.
So we got some big, heavy hitters today. I'm super excited to welcome to the podcast. So with that, let's officially welcome Greg and Julia to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's good to be here.
So great to be here.
Well, we are launching on the next season. And for those who are new to the Hole in My Heart podcast, we ask every guest this question. If part of the gospel is I'm more sinful and flawed in myself than I ever dared believe, yet at the very same time more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope, how and when was the gospel first good news for you? And how is it right now? How do you need the good news of Jesus right now? Julia, let's start with you.
So, this is such a long and twisty story. I would love to have you ask that question to St. Augustine. Say, so what, just tell us, summarize, the question.
2 sentences.
Anyway, grew up in a largely secular household, went to an Episcopal school that was pretty progressive, kind of knew the basics of the faith, but it kind of thought it was Christian-ish. But through various events in my life, kind of came to a crisis of faith the summer after my junior year of college. And my then boyfriend, now husband, said, well, maybe you should read some C.S. Lewis. And I just started reading lots and lots of C.S. Lewis. And I would say I attribute my conversion moment was reading Screwtape Letter number 23, where Screwtape says something on the order of, only today I've encountered a passage in a Christian writer where he recommends his own version of Christianity on the ground that only such a faith can survive the death of old cultures and the birth of new civilizations. And Screwtape says, you see the little rift? Believe this not because it is true, but for some other reason. And that something about that, believe it not because it is true, but for some other reason, really forced me to do I actually think that this is true? And if it's actually true, that's then for me, believing it was true was actually not a problem. I didn't really even have a problem with the resurrection. I had a problem with the virgin birth, the virginal conception of Jesus. That for me was always the sticking point. If I think that actually happened, well, that means he actually is God, and therefore the only rational response is to give him your life. So that's good news, right? Because I've found the way, the truth, and the life, and I now know what the purpose of it was. Bad news, though, because I realized, oh, that means I can't just organize my life in the way that is most comfortable and convenient for myself and maximizes my own achievements. I actually have to think about other people and their happiness.
Snap.
Oh, no. It took me a day or two to kind of work through that one. And I realized, well, I guess that's what I have to do.
So today, how does that good news affect your today?
It affects my today because it's the air I breathe. I mean, it's one of my favorite Psalms right now is Psalm 16, the last verse of which is, thou shalt show me the path of life. In thy presence is the fullness of joy, and at thy right hand there is pleasure forevermore. That's it. I mean, the fullness of joy is to be found in Jesus Christ, and in him through, it is only really through him that we can find joy at all in anything. So yes, I have found what I'm looking for, and just can't ask for anything more than that.
Thank you, Julia. I really appreciate that. Greg, we've had you on the podcast at least a couple other times. Can you give a little refresher for those who don't know you, just your finding Jesus, the good news of the gospel, and how is it still good news today?
I'll give the snapshot of the story so I was growing up in Indonesia, which at the time was a somewhat politically fragile place. And I remember thinking, oh, so much of this is so out of my control, because there's this impulse within me to want to sort of if I can micromanage all the parts of my life, I can make myself have a really good life. And I was like, I'm not actually sure that I can guarantee that for myself. I don't think I have all the right buttons to push to make everything come out okay. I think this may all be a grand disaster.
Yeah.
And so my running into Jesus was in many ways a discovery of there's this Jesus guy to whom I can entrust the really fragile life that's already out of my control, and he in return will give me everything. And at the time I remember thinking this is the best deal in the world, which I still affirm it to be the best deal in the world, though admittedly it's gotten a lot more complicated since I was 7. But there is, this ongoing awareness, I think, from being a youngster in Indonesia to the present day, this ongoing awareness that everything that I could possibly have to give to Jesus is always going to be so much less and so much more out of my control anyway. Even if I have this idea that I can control it, I really don't have that much to offer when I give my life. But what I receive in turn is this, tremendous life that's well beyond anything I could dream.
I love that. Thank you both.
Yeah. So the two of you wrote this book titled Sexuality Beyond Sex, which the title in itself is a bit confronting some popular beliefs, I guess. And so in your mind, what is the biggest misconception that Christians have about sexuality that you're trying to work through with this book?
I think for me, one of the really big things that drove our writing in this book was this idea that we saw repeatedly, that if you're single or for some other reason not having sex, you're sort of therefore wasting your sexuality. And so sexuality is thus good news if you're married and having all the sex you want to be having. But if you're not that person, then your sexuality is somehow bad news. And I think both of us saw that to be a problematic belief. And maybe Julia already knew exactly how she wanted to respond to that problematic belief. But for me, part of writing this book was being I want to figure out why I don't believe that's true. I want to figure out why sexuality is actually a part of the good design of Jesus for all of us, including the single and celibate folks among us.
Julia, what would you say to that question? Is it what do you think it's trying to correct?
I think it's mainly trying to correct the idea that sexuality is about primarily about sexual activity between human beings. I mean, it's in a way, it sounds weird to say that it's not, but really our sexuality ultimately is about our relationship with God. And this is part of a kind of a larger issue that, like, when you come to enter more deeply into the reality of Christian truth, you come to realize, well, actually, everything in the world, everything in our experience, everything in nature, everything in history, all of that is actually pointing us toward the ultimate reality of the intimate union with God to which every one of us is called. And we talk a lot about in our book about the telos, right? The ultimate goal of everything. Our telos is intimate union with God, and our sexuality is meant to point us toward that ultimate reality. And when it's rightly ordered, when we recognize that that is the telos of our sexuality, then other things, I think, will can fall into place more easily. Again, C.S. Lewis, he says, when you put first things first, you get second things thrown in. You put second things first, you lose both first and second things. So I feel like a lot of the problems that we have with understanding sexuality and experiencing sexuality in our world is because people are making it a first thing. They're saying that, I mean, secular culture maybe is saying that, sex, sexual expression, sexual pleasure, sexual intimacy, whatever, like that is the most important thing. Maybe in Christian culture, it's more, well, yeah, and that has to be within a marriage. But then it's okay to put it first, right?
Right.
But it's actually never okay to put it first, right? It is always meant to be a part of our relationship with God and with the divine love story, in which we are the bride and Jesus is the bridegroom. And if we forget that, we're always going to get sexuality wrong.
So when I try and make that argument, Julia, on stages, I tend to get a response that is almost angry, like, blah, blah, blah. You're so high-minded, spiritual. Just tell my wife to have more sex with me. Like, they may actually even say that. But Matt, I bet you've heard that in the counseling office. He's nodding his head for those who are listening.
Wow. Yeah.
So how, I guess, like, I'll start with you, Julia, and then Greg, I want to go to you next, asking about single people. But can you help marry that for, let's say, the husband who's sitting here being like, blah, 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 you're too spiritual minded. Tell my wife to have more sex. Can you help marry the two a little bit more?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I would say if the attitude is blah, 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 you're too spiritual minded, and we should be focusing on us and not on God, then that's kind of a problem. I mean, another thing C.S. Lewis says is, like, the one thing Christianity can't be is moderately important, right? Either if it's false, it's of no importance. If it's true, it's of ultimate importance. It has to be the center of your life. And if it's not, then things are going to go awry one way or another with your life, whether it's your sex life or, anything. I mean, God will strip away the various consolations until we call out to him and say that we need him, because he is ultimately what we need. And one of the reasons that the poor are blessed, which is, really crazy when you think about it, but it is a pretty constant theme of the gospel, is that they know they need God.
I love that. Thank you for pointing back to, let's talk about putting first things first. Let's talk about, is he ultimately important or not? And I think, like we talked before the tape started running about our Impossible Marriage book, and that's kind of the lesson I learned in our marriage journey, is looking through sex to God's union and desire for union with us. That changed a lot for me.
Amen.
Greg, I want to jump to you, and you alluded to a problem I also hear when I speak on this, and I know you've heard it a million times, is, okay, what about single people? Are we just wasting our sexuality? So how did you answer that question while writing this book?
I mean, I think, and it comes back to the question that we were just talking about, right? Which is, what happens when we stop thinking about sexuality just as something that points us toward like two people gonna have sex with each other, and points us towards something larger, which is that all our unmet longing is meant to drive us back to the person of Jesus. Because I think if you're single, or if you're for any other reason not in a place where you're having sex, and the question is, how am I supposed to think about this part of myself that is longing for something that I don't currently have? If your whole view is, oh, all that part of myself, my whole sexuality is just supposed to point to sex, then all you can do to that longing part of you is just say a lot of no repeatedly. Nope, nope, still no, still no, still no.
Right.
And instead, when we start to see that part of ourselves as something that's actually meant to drive us to the person of Jesus, then it becomes an invitation to see the beauty for which we were created. Not the beauty for which we were created necessarily of experiencing a sexual relationship in this lifetime, though some people will, and that, could be lovely. But the beauty that all of us were created for, the place where all of our unmet longings are ultimately fulfilled. And it's a reminder for me to recognize that even though there are distinctive things about my unmet longing as a single person, rumor has it that married people also have unmet longings. And those married people are also meant to see their unmet longings as pointing them toward the person of Jesus. And so in that sense, there's really nothing remarkable about the unmetness of my own longing, because I participate in the thing that we all experience as human beings, which is the sense that there's something about me that is missing until it finds its completeness. And that's where we're back to Saint Augustine, to whom Julia was pointing us earlier. This notion that when we find that longing part within us, how does Augustine say it, Julia? Save me from my own inability to quote Augustine.
Sure. You made us for you, Lord, and our heart is restless until it finds its rest in you.
There's a God-shaped hole in our heart, if you will.
Exactly. I love the title of your podcast. Yeah. And it's not just our heart. It's our whole being. It's our yeah, I don't know if we want to go there talking about the Greek words for this and that. And,
Well, what I love and I'm hearing is what you're describing is not a second-class life. This is a human life lived in submission and in the already not yet of what we will experience in eternity.
Yes.
It's not that single people have a second-class life. It's that we're all in a posture of longing and waiting. And some of us experience a glimmer of eternity in sexuality. But Greg, you experience glimmers of eternity in how God meets that longing in you. Okay, sorry. It's Matt's turn, but I want to... I hope I want to ask, Greg, you experience deep intimacy with Jesus, even if it's not through looking through the lens of sexual intimacy.
Yeah.
How?
I think to borrow the broader metaphor of sexuality, I think of how Scripture wraps up right with this wedding feast. Christ and his bride are finally joined as one. And so there's a sense in which, while I or anybody who's waiting for that grand consummation of all things, while we're waiting, we're kind of in what you could call the engagement period. And generally, when I interact with somebody who's engaged and just so stoked to get married and can't wait, I don't think, oh, this poor engaged person, how they're suffering during the engagement. I think, oh my gosh, what a beautiful season of their life to be in engagement, to be headed toward the thing that they're ultimately so excited about, but also to find in the affianced state something really beautiful just in the experience of longing. And I think for the single person who recognizes that sexuality is ultimately pointing us to Jesus, there's an invitation to see our own singleness as a participation in the affianced state. And I recognize looking at our single friends and being like, great news, you're participating in the affianced state, may not bring them immediate and, entire comfort. But I know that for me, it has been such a beautiful way of reordering that part of me that wants to be sort of like that part of me that wants to feel sorry for myself and saying, oh, there's actually something much more fruitful to do with this longing than to feel sorry for myself. And that's actually to feel a great sense of anticipation for the way I already get to participate beautifully in something that's only going to grow more beautiful over time.
That's what's up.
Thank you for sharing that. Like, there's a lot of stuff going through my head right now because, I work with a lot of people who experience same-sex attractions or who have just different sexuality than what is, heteronormative. And a lot of times there's this sense of shame if they come from a Christian background. Like, why am I this way? Yeah. And try as I might to, convince someone of the goodness of that. Because I can think of a few guys in particular where, and Greg, you are one of these guys that I'm about to describe. Not you personally, actually, but I see a great deal of relational drive and proactivity in them, and for men who typically can be a little bit more passive and less connected socially, when I hear about the relationships that these guys have fostered in friendship, I'm like, you wouldn't have fostered that if you weren't you.
Sure.
There's such a good connection that can happen when they're not ashamed of this part of their sexuality. So I guess for you, I've seen this when you're interacting even with our kids, right? I remember being jealous of you at one point because we were sitting in New Holland Brewery. We're having dinner. My kids are with us. Lori's with us. She goes to the bathroom and you had such an ability to ask good questions to my kids and to pursue their little hearts. And I was like, how is Greg so good at this? And that wouldn't have happened if you weren't you, right?
Sure.
Not to say that that's all tied to sexuality, but if your sexuality is something beyond just sexual interaction, it's it's wrapped up in the totality of you. That is a part. You can't extract that from who you are just as a person. And so I guess, okay, I'll wrap this into the question. If culture is saying that sexuality is about sexual fulfillment, which to me screams, this is a personal consumptive act. That is kind of the cultural teaching, but the gospel tells us that sex is not supposed to be this consumption. It's supposed to be something utterly different.
Yeah.
How does that shift in understanding that sexuality is not just about personal fulfillment shape and change the way we think about ourselves and about our relationships with other people?
I love that question. Because, one of the things that's so beautiful, even about how sexuality gets introduced to the story in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, is we see this version of Adam that's all alone, right? The pure individualist version of humanity, that you can do it by yourself. And God looks at that version of humanity and is like, oh, this is a bad idea. We actually need people who, by definition, are reliant on community. And even though, and so there's this, on one level, that's saying sex is a two-player game. It takes two to procreate. But it's such a bigger statement than that. Because even for me, as somebody who's not having sex, I still recognize if I were not in a human race where other people were having sex, we would all quickly disappear, so I'm reliant on community. I can't just be Greg, the only human being on earth, and everything works, but I need to be participant in part of a larger story. And the more I believe that to be true, that I, in my own little way, am participant in this larger story, then the more I can choose to find really beautiful fulfillment in not needing to be the whole idea by myself, but in getting to participate in what other people are up to. So, for instance, when I get to hang out with the Krieg kids, who are, for the record, podcast listeners, you should know these kids are so cool. So it does help. I'm way more fun with like really cool kids than I am with just your average child. But when I'm hanging out with the Krieg kids, they don't have to be like centrally part of my story. I can be like, oh, I get to have this kind of uncle capacity. Matt and Lori made some cool kids, and I just get to sort of hop on here in a supporting role. When we become more willing to see ourselves as people who occupy supporting roles rather than people who always need to be the hero of the story, then I think we have a lot more freedom to see the way just our createdness, including our sexuality, drives us into community and say, oh yeah, I want to participate in that work of community with other people.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And I love what he says about, seeing yourself as in a supporting role rather than necessarily the hero of the story. But, I'll pull my Catholic, card here. Like Catholicism, the defining word is and, right? So it is both the case that we are in a supporting role in God's great story. We are not the center of it. And he loves each one of us. He loves me. He loves you individually as if, I am the only heroine of the story, right? Or, that both of those things are simultaneously true. That the church collectively is his bride and each individual soul is his bride. And I think holding both of those truths, when you realize that both the intensity of my own belovedness, the way God loves me, it is from that then I then have this realization of, and he loves every other human being with that same intensity of love. And therefore I should too, right? Like the first and great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Love your neighbor as yourself, right? All of those things. Like first, his love comes first. The recognition of his love for us then leads to our love for other people. And so rather than, I think our natural tendency is to see ourselves as the only, as the star of the show.
Julia, I'm curious, and I'm going to ask you this too, Greg, is when you think about your living out this union with Christ, and Julia, you are married, how have the people around you, the family of God, supported your awareness and your deepening understanding of this bridegroom, and even your actual real life marriage? How's your community supported you in that?
Yeah, great question. My husband he's pretty terrific. And
bummer.
He does, yeah.
I'm just kidding. You're like, it's not that hard. I don't need people. No.
No, he does actually, he has shown me what it means to, husbands love your wives as Christ loves the church. But that has become more and more true the more deeply he has entered into his relationship with Christ, and the more we have both grown spiritually. In terms of my community, honestly, I don't think this is something that a lot of Christians are intentional about, at least that I know of in my, the whole kind of, bride-bridegroom relationship. Yeah, it's something that's there. Like we know that's how the story ends. But I guess one of the things we wanted to do in this book is to, in a sense, reorient the whole way people think of the Christian faith, that it is this love story, right? That is the defining narrative, that God's love relationship with his people. And when you recognize that that's kind of the overarching narrative of human history, of salvation history, I think that it changes the whole way you think about sexuality.
What about for you, Greg? Thank you, Julia. What about for you, Greg, as you're living in this affianced? Dude, I didn't even know that word. Can you say that again?
Affianced.
Affia? Do I need to say it with my West Michigan accent or not?
You can say it however you want. You could say engaged. How does engaged sound?
Betrothed. How about betrothed?
Betrothed is nice. I like betrothed.
Affianced. I'll practice it for a while. Okay, living in this status that we actually all are. Everyone married and single is living in that. Yeah. But in your particular living into it, how is your community supported you, reminded you of that, like filled you with more excitement? How's that worked out for you?
Part of what's been really beautiful for me to experience in my community has been people who see me and my singleness as a gift to the larger community, rather than, as I think so many single people experience, their singleness, and specifically their sexuality in their singleness, feels like a threat. So for instance, I think of so many like stories I've heard from friends, or just stories that circulate in the world of single men for whom it's like, at some point we start to wonder, like, is this guy just bad at dating, or is he like a creeper that, like, and meanwhile, single women, I think so often single women are getting treated as like, these are a threat to all our men, as if women are somehow supposed to be responsible for men. Anyway, it's a whole mess, but I think so often single men and single women, for various reasons, get treated as if the fact of their singleness in relation to their sexuality poses some threat to the community around them. And I think it kind of the exact opposite of like what Matt was saying earlier about like, it was so cool to see you hang out with our kids, like the gift of getting to be in community with families like your family, and with church communities like the one that I have here in Boise, and with friends like Julia. I love having married female friends who are like, just getting to form all these communities where like the fact of my singleness in the context of my sexuality, instead of being perceived as a source of threat, can become a part of the story through which we see the beauty of Jesus in one another.
Yes.
Because I think the more we receive that invitation to see the beauty of Jesus in one another, in the particularities of our stories, then we come to realize how beautiful it is that we have married people and single people, both of whom are sexual beings who are all designed to exist together in the body of Christ, which is collectively doing the work of the kingdom. To see our differences from one another, including the differences in our sexual stories, not as accidents or as something that we need to sort of like try to sweep under the rug, but instead as something that we can hold openly before Jesus and say, like, how is this part of the beauty of the kingdom work that you want to do in and through us?
We need to say this literally every single day. I could say it every single day online or everywhere I'm speaking, is like, if you care about, God's design for marriage, you need to care about the beautiful vision of married and single people living in this anticipation of the marriage. And then you have to do all this theological work, because for some reason we like missed these sermons, which is why you guys wrote the book. We missed it. We don't get it. And so we're just trying to marry off cousin who's so-and-so, and as if that's the goal. When we miss the telos, we miss the actual end.
Well, I guess the thing that strikes me in this conversation is we're talking about sex and sexuality, and we haven't yet gone over the rules of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do,
good.
Right?
Yes.
And that's so much of that's so much of the training, the upbringing that we receive when we're kids, is how this is the line, don't cross this line. And yet we've had this whole conversation about the end game, the wonderful vision that God has designed, and not once, at least up until I brought it up, have the rules been mentioned. And so, like, as you guys are writing this, how did you guys shift from that, like, focus on rules and do's and don'ts to something much grander? And how can we help the church as a wider community engage in that conversation in the same way?
Well, I feel like, the whole idea of that Christianity, that morality, whether it's sexual morality or just morality in general, is basically a set of rules. Like that is kind of the perception of Christianity, from a lot of the larger culture, but also from Christians themselves, which is really sad, because ultimately morality, whether it's sexual or other, it's the instruction manual for joy. And I think one of the things we're trying to do in the book is like show why this is true, to show the beauty of the Christian vision of sexuality. We're not even arguing about what the rules are. We're just assuming, we both kind of started from the assumption that the traditional sexual ethic is correct. 2,000 years of teaching on this are not wrong. But we're, rather than kind of trying to justify it, I think we're trying to show that here's how this fits into the larger story of God's love. And that it's again, that like sort of the theology of the body, that marriage is meant to be an icon of the Trinity, of the love between persons who are both like and unlike, and the love between them creates new life, right? That's what the Trinity is. That's what it means that one of the things it means that we are made in the image of God. And so I think when you start not from here's what you can and can't do, but here's why it all makes sense. Here's what it means to be made in female in the image of God and told to be fruitful. That then the rules, kind of they follow as kind of a natural corollary, rather than starting with, well, you can go this far, you can't do this, you can't do that. I mean, that doesn't, especially for a culture that thinks that the whole concept of sin is basically obsolete, and that a lot of these rules are just kind of made up by Christians, and we'll be happier if we disobey them than if we obey them. I think you have to kind of lead with the beauty of the Christian vision, and then let people kind of see how the rules fit into that.
Yeah, I think what I would add to that is when we think of ourselves through the framework of being engaged, betrothed, affianced, the thing about falling in love is it's not really primarily about like checking off a set of check boxes, keeping some rules. You don't fall in love by keeping rules. You fall in love by falling in love. And the falling in love is the thing that drives you to want to love well and be the sort of person who receives love well. And so when we think about Christianity in the way, as Julia was saying, that so many people perceive Christians as being, and so many Christians perceive ourselves as being primarily about like keeping some rules, we can keep rules really well and fail dramatically at falling in love. This is the thing that the Pharisees were notably so good at doing with God, right? Is finding a way to keep a lot of God's rules and still have their hearts so distant from him. And so I think the more we move the conversation about human sexuality away from what are the rules and how do we check off as many of the check boxes as possible, and make it instead a conversation about, because our sexuality is designed to help us fall in love with God, how do we do that so well that stewarding our bodies in the way that honors him is the thing that makes the most sense? Mm-hmm. I think it's both more effective and it's way more fun in the process.
Yeah, so true. So I'm picturing someone listening right now who's like, okay, run that by me one more time. How is sexuality about more than sex? And can you encourage me? I'm my marriage feels like garbage, and it's like just empty desert. There's not that love relationship you're just talking about, Greg. Or my singleness feels like just saying no to porn. Can you run it by me again and offer me a little bit more hope? I'd love to hear that something from you, Julia, for that person, and then you too, Greg.
I mean, I guess one thing to remember is that, and Greg kind of alluded to this earlier on, that the longing, the unfulfillment, that sort of aching desire that we feel is nothing compared to God's desire for you. I mean, that that the if you look at the bride and bridegroom in the Song of Songs, it's pretty intense, and that's just again a pale glimmer of in poetry of the way God desires us. And I don't know, Greg, do you think we should talk about how sexy the Eucharist is?
Oh, yes. Why haven't we talked about that yet? Go back.
Now that we're there, I think you've got to.
Audience woke is right there. You're right there.
I'll let my Protestant friend take this one.
So little backstory here. When we sat down to outline, like, what are we going to write about in this book? Julia was like, obviously, we're going to need a chapter on the Eucharist. And I was like, will we though? But I trust her as a woman of good judgment. So we put it on the table of contents, and then we sat down and started writing. And oh my goodness, I just became so obsessed with the significance of how we think about the Lord's Supper, communion, Eucharist, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
How we think about the gathering together to say we're not just gathering as a community to like think nice thoughts about Jesus and sing some songs about him and talk about him to each other, but we're actually gathering to receive Jesus into us. That Jesus wants to be physically present with us. And here, admittedly, we get into all kind of dispute about like what precisely is the nature of the Lord's Supper, and I'm not Catholic enough to hold the doctrine of transubstantiation. But I hail from a Protestant tradition that holds what we call the real presence view, which is that there's some way in which Jesus really is present, that there's symbolism involved in the Lord's Supper, but it's not mere symbolism. There's something more spiritually significant that has like physical power for us. Which seems to me to accord really well with like what Paul says to the Corinthians, where he's like, look, some of you are doing this wrong, and that's why you're like falling asleep and dying. Like there are these very bodily consequences to our mistreatment of the Lord's Supper. And it struck me, we're having all these conversations about sexuality and human marriage, which is a metaphor pointing to our marriage with Christ. And to be clear, human marriage on earth is the metaphor. It's not that Jesus and us are like a cute metaphorical representation of real marriage, which is what we do, what a husband and a wife. The reality is that like what we do on earth is just the metaphor. Like that's just the shadow, and it's pointing us to the real thing. Yeah. And I began to realize, if like our earthly marriages are the metaphors pointing us to the real thing, but in the Lord's Supper, we actually have the foretaste of the real thing itself. We actually have Jesus bodily with us in union in a way that we will ultimately experience perfectly for eternity, but we're already getting that foretaste right now. And so I began to realize like, I'm pretty sure this is like the most important thing I could possibly be doing with like my celibate body at this moment, is participating in like this first foretaste of that perfect union with Christ. And it's a thing that we all get to do in community together. Anyway, yes, the Eucharist, it's very sexy stuff. I'm all about it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's every time I talk to people who are like deeply into theology of the body or like study this deeply, communion is always brought up, but that was the most, I've never heard the Eucharist is sexy. So thank you for sharing that. So it sounds like, Julia and Greg, whoever wants to jump in, for that person who is feeling alone and lonely, they're like, okay, communion, Lord's Supper, Eucharist, that's important. I'm starting to feel a glimmer of it, but what maybe some final words of hope might you have for them as they're anticipating union with Christ?
Your loneliness is actually a gift. It's that hole in your heart. It's that hole, and okay, I am gonna bring in the Greek word here. Okay, it's the word for like stomach where food goes and the womb where babies go is actually the same word in Greek. It's koilia. It means basically a hollow place in you. It's the seat of your appetites. And one of the most shocking verses in John's gospel, he says that for those who believe, rivers of living water will gush from their koilia, from their belly, actually. And, you know, we are, as embodied physical beings, God wants to sanctify, to enter every part of us, including that. And so when we gather together to eat the Lord's Supper, I mean, first of all, it is a communal act. It has to be a communal act, right? So you're automatically being incorporated into the body of Christ with other believers. But that also, you know, it is through that kind of intimate bodily union, this side of eternity, that you are being actually Christified, right? That he is entering into your belly, again, your stomach, your womb, right? The fruit of your womb is koilia. That new life is being generated in you, whether or not you feel anything, right? That is the reality that is happening. And that when you start to sort of center your life, when you feel that longing and that pull, and I'm pulled towards that communion table, that is the Holy Spirit working in you to bring you home, to bring you to Jesus, and to bring you into the wholeness of his body. If we didn't have those longings, if we didn't have sexual desire and loneliness and hunger and all those things, we might be tempted to think we're self-sufficient. Like, I'm good. Right?
Yep. That's good, Julia. What about you, Greg?
My simple encouragement would just be, remember what part of the story you're in. I think when we see ourselves as being in a story that starts with birth and ends with death, and we're just trying to make sort of like grind the best possible story out of our life that we can, then there's so much sense of like, oh, this moment is hard and that just sucks and is terrible. When we remember the larger, the grander story that we're part of, and this becomes part of like the adventure story that's going to turn into a part of the beauty ultimately. There's this line that a friend texted me recently since we've been quoting C.S. Lewis this whole podcast anyway. A friend texted me from The Great Divorce this line: "Heaven once attained will work backwards and turn agony into glory." This sense that when you read a really good story and it's like, oh, almost like the more you went through to get to like the grand end of the story, the more glorious the ending becomes, right? Like if nothing adventurous happens along the way, what a dull story. But if we're in our adventure, like, oof, and things are rough at times, and things are challenging, but what they're doing is contributing to this grand beauty at the end of the story. And I think when we remind ourselves where we are in the story, even those things that in some ways do indeed feel like an emptiness or a missing something or an agony, become part of the beauty of what we know we're participating in ultimately.
Amen. All right, Greg and Julia, thank you so much for all that wisdom, all that casting the beautiful vision. Like I said, we need to hear it like almost daily because it's so easy to forget in our daily suffering where we're headed. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It's so much fun.
All right, if you guys want to read Sexuality Beyond Sex, which is vital, we're going to link to it in the show notes. Matt, what are you going to leave today's conversation with?
Probably a lot of thoughts about the Eucharist, but
I knew you were going to say that.
no, I mean, I feel like my brain is everywhere whenever I talk to Greg because he's got so much information and my brain just wants to make connections. And so I think, yeah, the big thing for me is really like as they're talking about community and the role of, I guess, us as individuals within community, and you can't really extract sexuality outside of this communal understanding of the bride of Christ. To me, it just kind of struck me with this, like in every aspect, every relationship of our lives, we are called to be dying to self. and in a way that is a servant rather than a one who is looking to be served. And so that would go in marriage, that would go in friendship, that would go in parenting.
Yeah.
And so I guess that's what's striking me right now.
I appreciate that as well. I think what I'm going to take away, it was actually like Julia kind of like thinking when I was like, how does community help you as you live out this marriage picture? She's like, I don't know. That's why we wrote the book. And then I was thinking it myself. I was like, how do I invite my friends right now into helping you and I live out the marriage picture? And how am I encouraging others? Like, am I, we definitely, when we're writing Impossible Marriage and whenever I speak, I talk about it, but I'm like, in my day-to-day life, I want to be reminded more of what you and I are doing. Like, I think it at some level, but I'm curious how I can invite my own friends into our, as we used to say, living the metaphor, our living a picture of eternity and reminding me of what this is all about. If you guys have any thoughts or questions, you can find me on the old Instagrams and DM me there. I love your questions. I can't reach all of them, but I try to. But I love hearing any thoughts, any suggestions for who we should interview. I love to hear it. You can also join the Hold My Heart Podcast Facebook group. For those of you who like the show, feel free to rate and review it. We appreciate it. This is a part of the show where I thank everybody and remind you of who our sponsor is, who's awesome, our friends at O'Neill Asset Management. That is our actual real life friends. I'm actually hanging out with his wife tomorrow. But if you have questions about your financial landscape and would like them to take a look at it, just go to o'neillassetmanagement.com. Thanks so much to Steve Odell. Thank you to Bethany Sanderson and the team at WCSG for hosting us, and for all of us here at the Whole Matter Podcast. We will see you next time.